Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to share with you this morning a little bit about a new tool that the state of Vermont is developing that will help us to measure and assess progress of Vermont's climate action. We'll kick it off with some introductions to let you know who's in the room. My name is Sophie Veltraub. I work for the Climate Action Office of the state of Vermont as the Communications and Community Engagement Coordinator. And we're very excited to be working with ERG's team on this project. I'll hand it over to them to introduce themselves to you all.
Great, thanks, Sophie. My name is Melanie Sands. I'm a senior social scientist at Eastern Research Group, and I'm helping manage this project for our team. And I think ERG team, we can just go around. I'll call on someone and you can call on someone after that. So I will just turn it over to Nicole to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Nicole Williams, and I am communications specialist, communications and outreach specialist at the Eastern Research Group. I'm going to turn it over to Kat.
Thanks, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. My name is Kat Flick. I'm a research analyst with ERG. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. And I'll pass it to Kessel.
Hi, everyone. I will be your Zoom tech for today. So we have some Zoom housekeeping we'll go over in a second, but basically, if you have any Zoom questions, I'm your person.
Great, and I think we can jump into the Zoom housekeeping on the next slide.
Yes. So welcome, everyone. I'm Kessel, as I already mentioned, and I will be your Zoom tech for the day. So very quickly, audio is available for this presentation through your computer's speakers or by telephone. If you experience any technical difficulties with your speakers, you can always use the phone by clicking the upward arrow by the audio settings option in your Zoom control panel, and click the upward arrow, choose switch to phone audio, and follow the instructions provided. You'll have the opportunity to speak today, but we are asking people to please mute themselves if you are not speaking in order to preserve audio quality. If you have questions during the presentations, please type them into the chat box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom control panel. Or if you have questions at the end of the presentations, you can raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon, that's a hand, at the bottom of your screen, and I will give you the ability to unmute yourself. Again, if you're experiencing any tech difficulties, please let me know in the chat and I will troubleshoot any issues with you. That is it for tech support. So Sophie, back to you.
Great. Thank you. So we've taken care of our welcome and introductions. We'll next dive into a little bit about the project's background and purpose. Why are we here and why are we doing this? Then we'll give you an overview of this measuring and assessing progress tool. You'll notice in the acronym there, it's also called the MAP tool. I'll just note it's not a map, but that's what the acronym stands for, measuring and assessing progress. So you might hear us refer to it as that as well. Then we'll have some opportunity for some question and answer, so we can hear from you and answer any of your questions. And then we'll have a discussion, a little interactive activity to gather your feedback. And then we'll close out. So why are we here today and what is the purpose of this tool? Okay. So back in 2020, there was a law passed in Vermont called the Global Warming Solutions Act. This law required that Vermont create a plan called the Initial Climate Action Plan that would identify specific initiatives and programs to meet a couple of goals. Those goals are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the climate pollution that we create, to increase carbon sequestration, so the carbon that plants and natural lands are taking up out of the atmosphere, building resilience and expanding adaptation to a changing climate in Vermont. So how are we preparing for climate change? And then finally, incorporating equity and engagement throughout. So as you can see, we, after passing the law back in 2020, there was a body established called the Vermont Climate Council. That also happened in 2020. That's a mix of legislative appointees. They're not legislators, but they're people from across Vermont, citizens appointed by the legislature to fill certain seats that represent certain interests or perspectives. There's also a mix of state administration officials on that climate council. That climate council's job is to create the climate action plan, which they did so and adopted by December 2021. And right now, here in 2025, that plan is actively being updated. That update will be done by July 1st, 2025. If you're interested for more information, a deeper dive on that, there's a bunch of information on our website, climatechange.vermont.gov. I'll put that link in the chat in a bit as well. So what does all that have to do with this tool that we're talking about today? That law that was passed in 2020 required that the state will track key components related to climate action. Furthermore, that law requires that the Agency of Natural Resource will develop a framework to assess the progress so we can report on and track and communicate how the state is doing on the climate action that we need to take. So to meet these requirements, ANR, the Agency of Natural Resources, plans to develop this tool called the Measuring and Assessing Progress tool. Next slide. So the tool has a couple of goals, or the project to create this tool has a couple of goals. We're right now in the first phase of this project, and actually creating the tool itself is going to happen in the next phase. This first phase is really about laying the groundwork and discovering what is this tool going to say and talk about. So we're looking at how is the tool going to be used and by whom. We'll share that with you later. What are the activities that we should be measuring? How exactly are we going to measure those activities? And then what data is already out there that we can use to support the measurement of those activities? And then what data might be missing that we still need to gather and might be useful in the future? So as I mentioned, we're in the first phase of this project. That's going to lay the groundwork. And then the next phase, we anticipate that to be late 2025 and early 2026 to actually develop the tool itself. Next. So I'll pass it over to Melanie with ERG to give an overview of a little more of the process of this project that we've been in over the past few months.
Great, thanks, Sophie. Just gonna toggle my screen, my little laptop here so I can see everything. Great. So just in general, you can see here a project overview. And starting in October of 2024, that's really when we started kicking off the project. So we're a little more than halfway through. And in October 2024, one of the first things we did, you'll see here that we have it labeled as data governance, but that was really our task name. And what we did initially was we did a review of existing resources and tools that might be relevant to this project. And so we could get a sense of what kind of other tools have other states or maybe within the state of Vermont that might be relevant, trying to assess what kind of features of the tools we like, what kind of information they contain, what kind of data did they use, where did that data come from. But then we also wanted to establish a group within that would stay along the course of this project, the tool development and beyond, which we refer to as our data governance team. And it's really comprised of a group of individuals from different state agencies that will inform how the data for this tool is compiled and managed and used over time. So trying to get that group together so that as the tool information evolves, they would be on board to help guide and manage that tool information and be involved from the ground up. So once we did that initial starting to set up that group and then also reviewing existing information, then as we headed into winter of December 2024, we started really kind of digging in a little bit more to really consider what should the tool measure, what are the tool priorities, and who will use the tool, how will the tool be used. things of that nature. So we're really referring to that as tool priorities and metrics, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But starting to compile that information by looking at existing plans, climate-related plans in the state and things that inform climate action in Vermont to start pulling that information together. And so we'll get into the details of that later, but just as a snapshot, started pulling that information together. And then we started, after we compiled draft information, heading into January, we're going through a process where we're vetting that information with some external agency partners and also people from that original data governance team that was established toward the beginning of the project. And then we're going to be transitioning into figuring out how we're going to establish the data for what we're going to measure in the tool. So refining what we're going to measure, how we're going to measure it, and then shifting into, and what information do we have to measure those priorities. So that's around where we are in the project right now. And as we formulate all of that information, we'll transition into spring and summer by developing recommendations for the tool development using everything we've come through with this project. So really developing a report and recommendations because this is really foundationally laying the groundwork for the tool development, and the tool development will happen at a subsequent phase in 2025-ish, hopefully. So that's kind of the general overview. And then you'll see lastly that public engagement runs throughout the course of this project. And so whether it's external agency partners, meetings such as today, we're also engaging some community-based organizations to really hear from them and their constituents, really selecting community-based organizations who are working with folks who may be disproportionately impacted by climate change. So from the broader public to community-based organizations, agency partners throughout the project, trying to get key pieces of information about those tool priorities, refining and shaping what the tool should measure, how the tool should measure it, what information is available. So that is running throughout. Next slide, please. So to give a little sense of what kind of tool we're talking about here, because we say tool, as Sophie noted, even though it says map tool, it's not actually a map. And so just we have a couple of example tools of the type of tool that we may be heading toward. Again, we're laying the groundwork with what should be measured and how, and the actual tool development is in the future. But just to give you a little bit of a sense, we'll provide a couple of examples here just to orient you to the type of tool, just so you have something in your mind as we move forward in the conversation of the type of tool that we might be talking about. So firstly, we have an example from Lake Tahoe, and it's the Lake Tahoe Climate Resilience Dashboard. For those of you who can see your screen, on the left-hand side, one of their tool interfaces, basically it lays out different climate goals from their climate strategy or their resilience action plan. And you can click on those different goals and then click to subtopics to see what activities are being completed. And so, for example, under goal 2, support a resilient environment, you can click on forest resilience and wildfire risk. And then you might see something like the information that appears on the right of your screen if you're looking at it. And what that figure is showing is really acres of forest being treated to mitigate wildfires. And they also then can click on additional data sources and links to gather even more information beyond that graphical information. So this is one snapshot of how their Lake Tahoe is able to convey progress on their climate actions related to their climate resilience action strategy. A little bit of a tongue twister in the morning. And so next screen, we can go to another example. And here we can see the California Climate Dashboard. So little bit different flavor of how information is presented. But in this this particular platform or tool. The tool is organized by sector and it's more directed toward the public. So tried to make pretty user-friendly. And so you can see different sectors on the left part of your screen. And so you might see, for instance, you see transportation, you see energy, you see these different topic areas. And then you click on a sector, it brings you to these different metrics or measures of the climate actions that are occurring. So an example in the energy sector, if you clicked on that, on the right portion of your screen, you can see some of what they are tracking there. And so what they, in the California tool, it's divided by sectors. You can click to see a little bit more about what's being measured for their climate actions. And then they provide these basically different layers of information that you can access by clicking on different links. So you can kind of get more granular if you so choose. Otherwise, you can have these high-level snapshots of climate action progress. And so now we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the measuring and assessing climate action tool that we're developing through this current process. Now we have hopefully a little bit of an idea of the type of tool we're talking about. Next slide, please. Okay. So kicking off a little bit more understanding or a little bit more about the map tool, as it might be referred to. Starting off with who is the tool designed for? Who's it being designed for? So in working with the state project team, they determined that the primary tool users are going to be the Agency of Natural Resources and other state agencies, with the primary uses of, there are two primary uses, and for those of you looking at your screen, they're bolded at the top of those sub-bullets, which are reporting and communications, and then also demonstrating climate action progress. So state agencies, primary user, primary uses, reporting communications, and demonstrating action progress. That said, there are some other uses for the tool that are listed there that we envision the tool will also be heavily used for, such as public education and outreach, planning and programming, and also decision making. So having that, a little bit better understanding of where are we with our climate action progress, what's happening, where is it at, how does that inform what we want to do next or our decisions moving forward. And that could be at the state level, the community level, for example, which transitions us to the next slide, which is secondary users. So while the tool is primarily designed for state agencies, really others are going to be able to hopefully use the tool as well. And it's really intended to, as much as possible, encompass other user groups such as the public, state legislators, climate council members, community-based organizations. So anyone who would really benefit from understanding the climate action progress in the state. The overall aim is that while we are trying to meet those primary needs of state agencies, we're also trying to provide and present information in a way that is usable to the general public. So try to meet those dual needs, just as some of the tools we just saw, they provide some higher level information, but then also the ability to kind of dig in through links and access some more nuanced or granular information below that. Next slide, please. The tool itself is going to track, or is intended currently where we are in the process to track several different elements of climate action progress across Vermont. And we're referring to these as sectors, similar to how that California tool was divided into different categories. So tracking progress of climate action across transportation, buildings and thermal energy, electricity, natural resources, the built environment, response and recovery, and equity and engagement. And I just want to note here that while we're envisioning, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these sectors and the sector priorities, and while a lot of these sectors, or most of them, are standalone sectors currently as we have things envisioned and set up as we're moving forward in this planning process, Equity engagement is actually set up to not necessarily be a standalone sector, but runs throughout all of the rest of these sectors. So it's integrated throughout, and we'll see that a little bit more as we talk through priorities in these sectors later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So the climate and equity progress that the tool is going to measure is really informed by existing Vermont plans and strategies and actions that are housed within those plans. So a few plans that we have used as key sources of this information: the Climate Action Plan from 2021, the 2023 State Hazard Mitigation Plan, the 2022 Comprehensive Energy Plan. And then as we're engaging that data governance team and external agency partners, if other relevant climate state plans that house strategies and recommendations, as those are available or become known to us, we're integrating those as well. So basically, we have gone through those plans and synthesized the priorities and strategies from those plans. And then from that, we have developed a rolled up set of priorities of recommendations, goals, strategies, and actions to guide the development of these metrics of what is going to be measured in the tool. And the intention is, by instead of measuring every little thing from every plan, and instead of rolling up to these themes of priorities that we're seeing across plans, the intention is really to develop a tool that those key priorities and areas that are being tracked are going to be consistent or evergreen over time. So maybe the things that feed into them will change. But for instance, we'll get a little bit more into it, but the key things, these high-level concepts that we're going to measure, will stay consistent in the tool. And then the things that feed into them, they might vary as different data becomes available over time, or different things get added to what contribute to those rolled up priorities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this time I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Kat, and we're going to talk through a little bit about the priorities for the individual sectors within the tool. And part of this is to share out the priorities that we've developed so far, that we've synthesized from these plans and these rolled up priorities. And so it's for your understanding. And then also, as you're listening, just really cue into, are there priorities within these sectors that you don't see that might feel important to you, that you feel might be missing? Because we're going to do an activity later, and we're really curious to see if our priorities are aligning with the priorities that you have for yourself and for your community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kat.
Perfect. Thank you, Melanie. So I will be walking us through the climate and equity priorities that we've identified thus far for each sector. And these priorities really just form the basis of the tool, because these are the areas that the tool is going to be measuring progress on. And for each priority, we have a set of metrics that we're developing that are going to help us understand how we're doing it, meeting each priority. So we will start with transportation, and I just want to note that these priorities are in no particular order. We don't have highest priority at the top, lowest at the bottom, so no particular order there. So the first priority on this list is to decrease greenhouse gas and other vehicle-based emissions from the transportation sector. The second is to reduce transportation energy burden, which is the average percentage of household income that is spent on transportation expenses. And as Melanie mentioned, the equity priorities are really woven in throughout all of these sectors. And this is an example of that. So in our metrics, for this priority, we expect to have one that shows the transportation burden overall, and then one that shows the transportation burden for low-income communities, because we know that low-income and marginalized communities tend to have higher energy burdens. So we want to be able to capture and acknowledge that difference in our metrics. The third priority within this sector is to increase transportation choices for Vermonters by expanding access to public transit, expanding access to active transportation like biking, walking, e-biking, and then expanding access to shared mobility services. And then finally, our last priority for transportation is to improve the resilience of Vermont's transportation system and to reduce the vulnerability of roads and bridges to natural events like floods and other hazards. And Kessel, we'll go to the next slide, please. All right, buildings and thermal energy. The first priority listed here is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from the buildings and thermal energy sector, which is often done through increasing home weatherization projects and by promoting the transition away from fossil fuel heating into electric or wood heating systems. And then just like transportation, we also have a metric here on energy burden, or priority here, sorry, to reduce the thermal energy burden, which is the average percentage of household income that is spent on heating and cooling. And then we have a final priority here to develop design and construction standards to improve the resilience of buildings and homes to extreme weather and other climate events, just like flooding and landslides and other hazards. All right, we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, electricity. First priority here is to protect critical infrastructure and improve resilience in Vermont's electric system, again, from hazards like flooding. Just like buildings and thermal and transportation, we also want to reduce the electricity energy burden, which is the average percentage of household income spent on electricity. And just like the other sectors here, we envision having one metric for overall energy burden in the state, and then one that focuses specifically on low-income energy burden. And then we have reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity sector by diversifying the grid. I think we can go to the next slide. So thanks, Kessel. All right, we have the natural and working land sector, which focuses a lot on agricultural and forestry operations in the state. So the first two priorities here are basically to lower the net emissions from forestry and agricultural operations in Vermont by reducing emissions that are produced from these operations and then also increasing sequestration in our forests and agricultural lands. And then jumping down to the third bullet, a priority is to conserve and enhance natural and working lands and the ecosystem services that they provide. And then to improve the resilience of Vermont's ecosystems, manage forests and farms, and the people and businesses that rely upon them to climate hazards like flood, heat, drought, wildfire, etc. We also want to support and enhance local agricultural markets and the consumption of local foods in Vermont, and expand education, technical assistance, and research to improve the resilience of natural and working lands. And these bottom two bullets are another example of how we're weaving equity and engagement throughout all of our sectors. So supporting and enhancing local agricultural markets and consumption of local foods. As part of the metrics for this priority, we will be looking at access to local foods within low-income communities, and then access to local foods overall. And then similarly, for expanding education, technical assistance, and research, we will also have metrics related to how technical assistance and funding are flowing to smaller scale businesses and low-income landowners, and then also some metrics that assess equity in education and technical assistance. And Kessel, next slide, please. All right, built environment sector priorities. We have two slides because there are a lot of priorities for this sector. And the first slide is going to focus on climate resilience priorities. First up is to enhance the resilience of Vermont's built environment, communities, infrastructure, buildings, and cultural assets to climate hazards, like the ones that are listed on the screen. Design climate actions to benefit the environment, improve conditions for people and disproportionately impacted populations, reduce risks in the built environment, and/or benefit the economy. We also want to incentivize climate resilient land use practices and ensure that all people have access to safe, accessible, energy efficient, and affordable housing. And we'll go to the next slide. All right, still on built environment, but this time the priorities are focused on climate pollution reduction in our built environment. We want to increase energy efficiency and energy performance of residential and commercial buildings, reduce energy use in buildings by at least 25%, reduce emissions associated with land use through zoning, siting, design, and development standards and building codes. Increase the carbon sequestration in our built environment, like through urban trees and urban planting. Reduce building-related carbon emissions by reducing the carbon content of fuels they use, so using alternative fuel types. And reducing emissions from industrial and technological sectors, so any like manufacturing that happens in Vermont. And we'll go to the next slide. All right, this is our final sector, response and recovery. And this really gets at making sure that Vermont's infrastructure and systems return to normal quickly after damage from natural disaster or extreme weather. Excuse me. So ensure roads and bridges return to normal operations in a timely manner after damage, and reduce the length of power outages, two of the priorities we have for this sector. Next slide. All right, so I just finished going through the draft priorities that we have so far, and I'll briefly discuss how we developed metrics. So as mentioned earlier, we are developing metrics that communicate progress on Vermont's priorities. And the metrics that we developed are informed by the existing Vermont climate and equity actions. And as we were developing metrics, we considered excuse me, data availability, because we need data for each of these metrics, the directness and clarity of the metrics, the relevance of the metric to future Vermont plans. We want the metric to still be useful and relevant in the future. And Melanie was talking about this a little bit earlier, but we don't want to have a metric that measures a very specific action in the current climate action plan, for example, because that action is likely to change. So the metrics that we did develop are likely to still be important in the future and carry over to future Vermont goals. And then finally, we also were considering the impact of the action being measured on meeting Vermont's climate goals. So does what we're measuring have an important contribution to Vermont's goals? And then we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So we wanted to show a sample priority and some of its associated metrics so that you can get a sense of the type of metrics that we'll be using to demonstrate progress on a particular priority. So the priority that we're looking at here in the example is to improve the resilience of Vermont's transportation system and reduce vulnerability of roads and bridges to natural disasters and weather like flooding, as you see in the images on the left. And the metrics that we developed to show how we're doing in this area are listed on the right side of the screen. And I'll go through them quickly. And these are all meant to just kind of be able to show progress towards reducing risks to flooding and other hazards in our transportation system and improving the resilience of our transportation system. So we have the number of road closures per year. We have the average length of road closures. We're going to look at that in both rural and in non-rural areas. The number of culverts replaced or increased in size. The number of transportation resilience improvement projects completed. The dollars of disaster assistance from FEMA, federally declared disasters. Hopefully this number would go down over time. The acres of land conserved for headwater and floodplain storage, and the number of mobile homes relocated from flood vulnerable locations. Hopefully this gives you a sense of, sorry, sort of the type of metrics that we're developing for each priority. Next steps in finalizing the tool content is to finalize the metrics that will be measuring progress on Vermont's priorities that we just went through, and to identify data sources. There will definitely be some data and metrics that we want to track, but we can't due to lack of data. But understanding those data gaps are going to be a big part of our next steps. And we'll go to the next slide. And if anyone has questions on the process or any of the draft priorities, feel free to put them in the chat. I think I've seen a couple come through already. See. Okay. Let's see. I see we have a question on allowing for increased household expenditures on electricity as we transition to electric heat in cars. I think that's a very good point, and the answer is yes. And we've been kind of discussing that topic a little bit internally, and I think we will probably be looking at just overall energy burden, which includes transportation, thermal, and electricity, just to kind of account for the fact that there is going to be some switch, and households will probably be having a higher percentage of their income spent on electricity and a lower percentage of their income spent on heating and cooling fuels as we make that transition. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
We also had in the chat just a theme of using disaster relief funding, whether it's should be FEMA funding. There's also just some different suggestions there of where we might want to, Anne suggested, like, do we want to use disaster relief funding in general? Should that be used rather than FEMA funding? So I think to those funding suggestions, first of all, thanks for all of this feedback. We'll be capturing the chat information as we move forward and taking things from this meeting. We are rolling into, as we've developed these draft metrics of how we're going to measure those priorities, we're rolling into our data sources now and moving forward. So I think these are all suggestions of what we want to look at, because we do want to be able to get to granular levels as possible, anything from the municipal to the state level. So I think all of these suggestions are helpful, and I think we'll consider them as we're narrowing down what we have to measure these different things and at what scale. So I think that's probably just a general reply, but we haven't necessarily landed on only one data source for measuring things yet, as we're just getting into really capturing and then refining our data sources for the different metrics and priorities. Just
Hello,
looking.
panelists. We also have somebody who's raised their hand.
Oh, great.
So, Ken, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you. On the timeline in December, it talks about logic models, and I wonder if the development of logic models has taken place, and this goes kind of to an origin story. The memo in, I believe, it was November of 2021, talked about the assessment and progress and assessment tool. And in that, the primary message there was to develop a tool that would be helpful for decision making. And I'm on the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Climate Council, and tried to raise fairly repeatedly that as we enter into this next iteration of the climate plan, it's valuable to be able to learn from the progress in the past. And so I guess I'm kind of disappointed that that a primary utilization of this tool is not for decision making, and in fact the timeline is not going to allow any sort of valuable input for the next iteration of the plan. But recognizing that, as we move even further, I want to stress the importance of learning from the work that we have done, the programs that have been put in place, not just to say, "Ooh, goody, we did them," pardon me, but rather the relationship between the progress in carrying out those tasks and the progress in meeting largely the climate goals, but also recognize the goals in terms of resilience and certainly equity. But making that relationship, which is the logic model, is critical. And to just have a tool that's just to say, "Ooh, this is how much work we did," I'm sorry, that's not valuable. And just so you know, I worked with the Environmental Protection Agency after 1993, when the Government Performance and Results Act was passed by Congress. And so, I've worked for many, many years on performance management, and unfortunately, many of them devolve into, ooh, these are the things we did.
Mhm.
And that, I'm gonna be blunt, that is not useful.
Mhm.
So, take my comments for what they're worth. But in terms of future iterations of the climate plan, unless we have these relationships between the types of activities and the impacts on the outcomes important, then we're really missing the appropriate use of data for management.
Yeah. No, those are all really helpful and I think insightful points, Ken. So thank you for making them. I think maybe I could kick off a little bit of a reply or some thoughts I initially had, and then open it up to all, like the state team and also the ERG team on that. So a couple of things. I think this is a first iteration of the tool and trying to figure out the priorities and what will be measured. I think that will continue to evolve in terms of the content. And I think there's an opportunity when the tool is developed in terms of how the information is conveyed, of how it could be useful to people. It seems that while, and this is a Melanie 2 cents thing, I'm not speaking on behalf of the state or anything. So it seems that a lot of the information that will be contained could be helpful for decision making, even if that isn't a stated priority. So I think some of that is evolving, but I definitely understand what you're saying, because we'll be tracking what's being done, but linking it to impacts is a critical part. So I might pause on that to get input from the other ERG and state team members, but I did just want to acknowledge or respond to a couple of the other things that you mentioned. One being that about the logic models. Yes, the draft logic models have been developed, and we're going through the process of vetting them with the data governance team to have those relationships between the priorities, the actions, and the outcomes. So those are in process, and that's how we develop the rolled up priorities and the underlying metrics that we didn't really get into today on this call, but we're in the process of refining those metrics. So yes, we have developed those. And then maybe something that the state team could possibly speak to, but just on my cursory awareness in terms of like the timing and the timing of the revision to the climate action plan. I agree that that could be helpful if the timing had played out a little differently to feed into things. I think there was a delay with this contract, and it was supposed to start a number of months earlier, and I think that timing would have played out to be a little bit more helpful in that way. So it's a water under the bridge situation, I suppose, but I think that maybe the initial timing, and maybe you heard as part of the Climate Council, but I think originally they were trying to tee things up in a way that maybe it could be utilized a bit more for the plan revision. So those are just my few cents to the different topics that were mentioned there, but just want to pause to see if anyone from the ERG or state team has additional thoughts about or responses to Ken's thoughts on how to make the tool potentially more meaningful to people, or any of the other points he might have touched on.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Definitely appreciate your comment. And, I think the goal is for the tool to be useful. I will say that the decision-making is in that top list of priorities. I know the two at the top that are highlighted as the first priorities are not that, but it is in that top list, which was narrowed down from a much longer list. I unfortunately am on the communication side of things, so I cannot speak to how that decision was made or the thinking behind that. And yeah, just hear those concerns.
I'd just like to say that my name is Lindy, and I support this project as part of the ERG team. And decision making is absolutely one of the objectives of the tool. I think one of the things that we're doing when we design the tool is to think about both what is the sort of public facing aspect of the tool, and then what is the information behind the tool that you can actually determine, just as you're saying, what are the things, like there's a, there will be a suite of inputs, and this gets to the logic model. There will be a range of inputs that go into meeting these priorities. And we didn't share those inputs because we don't have that amount of time, but those inputs are the actions from the current climate plan, the updated climate plan. As they change, those inputs will change, and determining which of those inputs are having the most impact on the priorities is one thing we're hoping the tool can do. So we're trying to identify the metrics that are most likely to be able to do that and refine them over time. So it is a key objective, and we completely agree that it's very important for this tool to be able to do that. And I think Kat mentioned the desire to make the priorities evergreen, so to speak, so that they can be consistent with the current climate action plan and the new climate action plan. And where we have been able to, we've been getting state agencies new climate actions that are going to go into the climate action plan, even though they're still draft right now. We're taking a look at those and making sure that the priorities are consistent and can be reflected and stay, again, evergreen. But we definitely have decision-making in our sites and agree with your comment. So thank you very much for making it.
We have another hand raiser. Alice, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yep, I got it. Thank you. Maybe what I'm going to say is more towards advocacy of certain parts of this ERG study. I'm an advocate, very strong advocate for wetlands and floodplain restoration projects. Wetlands and floodplains are our best natural carbon sinks that we can use. And I'd like to see, I see it in here, talking about these natural ways to reduce carbon emissions and to improve the climate. But I'd like to see a little more meat to that, and an idea of where that data is going to come from. Now, certainly ANR should have this data, because that's where I get a lot of my information from on wetland projects, etc. But I would also, and I'll put the link in the chat, would recommend a good data source is UVM. They have a very good program on floodplain and data, and very technical studies on, some of them confuse me, technical studies on how floodplains and wetlands work and why they should be used in large ways for carbon reduction. And I think that also goes into the education piece of this, because I work at a different level. I work on the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, and I work on the Planning Commission for the Waitsfield Town. And there's already in the chat a call for this data, whether it's in reports or ability to use it, is for the RPCs in the town to be in sync with the climate action plan. Like right now, I'm seeing a lot of disparity in data. And I mean, and older data that the regional area is having to use. And this is quite important, I think, for everybody to understand what the numbers really are. I mean, I'm working on the regional plan, and the only mapping and data I could work from was 5-year-old data from the Census Bureau. And that data, I mean, it's even more than that. It's more really, it went up to 2010, so it's really old data. And I'm looking at the numbers going, these aren't right. A lot's happened since this was put together. And I think it's really important for regional planning commissions and our town planning commissions to be able to add climate action to their reports and to their plans, and also to be using the most accurate data they can get. And I really think we've all got to get in sync on this, or whatever's going to come out of whatever's going to be created by the regional groups and the towns is not going to be in line with this work. And I think that's really important. So it's more advocacy than question.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. No, I appreciate that. I guess a couple of things came to mind as I was listening. One, just thank you for your thoughtfulness around it. And I think one thing that I know you were saying, like having some more meat behind it. I think one thing that we weren't able to show today, as we were trying to focus higher level, is the different metrics and the type of information that we're capturing that roll up or will be measuring these priorities. So really, I guess it's not fully capturing all of the things that you're talking about in terms of like wetlands, flooding, the things that are going to measure some of those higher level priorities. So we can give a look to that, making sure that, I think, especially as we've talked to some of the state agency partners and different folks who are working with those data sets, right? And making sure, have we fully captured the range of information that could be in the tool or that would be helpful in measuring that. And yes, the ANR data, the UVM data, all good sources, and we'll be tapping into some of that, or as much of it as we can moving forward. Also, in terms of your comments about the regional and local data, it is our aim to where we are able to have all the way down to municipal level data where it's available. And on that note, also, we are going to have some additional upcoming conversations around data and some of these elements of the tool. And to your point about regional and local data, as we're refining what that looks like, one of the ideas we've discussed with the client and the state team is having some conversations with regional planning commissions as they're connecting, to your point, connecting local level and state level information. So it may not be the last you hear from us, Alice. We may be knocking on your door for additional
that would be great.
conversations. But I just wanted to flag that a lot of what you're mentioning in that capacity is on our radar and has been raised in other conversations. So it's something that that we're thinking about as we lay the foundation for the tool.
Thank you. I think my dog is advocating.
Yeah. I'm not sure if anyone else from the ERG or state team wanted to say anything about Alice's comment. And then I also just wanted to say, while my mic is open, that I saw a question from Matthew in the Q&A box. And he was asking, can we have a California tool model for access needs for accessibility and accommodation services for everyone to use, and plain language model to understand the tool guidelines? There might be something that Sophie might be able to speak to. At this point, we're in the phase, Matthew, of thinking about what will be measured and how. I think these are some of the kinds of things that could, as we have conversations, could be recommendations or considerations for the next phase for the tool development and the guidance that goes along with that, as that might be a little bit beyond the scope of our current project. I don't know if there's something that you would want to contribute to that, Sophie.
Yeah, I think you captured it, Melanie. That will definitely be a consideration in the next phase when we actually create the tool. And we're beholden to and always try to exceed the requirements for accessibility that are true for state government.
I would just like to add that one of the dimensions of that is that we try to eliminate jargon as much as possible out of the priorities that we identify. So right now, while we have restated and changed the language for some of the priorities, we will take a look again once we settle on them to make them more as accessible to as many people as possible, reduce the amount of jargon and technical language as much as we possibly can. And that's definitely something that is included in those guidelines and that we'll be thoughtful about and that we can do before the tool's designed. Because there's accessibility to the tool, but there's also accessibility to the language, and the more technical the language, the more challenging it can be for people to know exactly what we're talking about. So I think that's a really good point, and we can definitely take a look at that when we finalize the language and the logic models and the priorities.
Really appreciate that.
Other questions?
I don't see any other hands raised on the part.
And certainly, as we have basically I was going to say an engagement activity. We're going to do an activity to get more input, but certainly if you have other questions or thoughts that come to mind, you can enter them in the chat throughout the duration of the meeting or even after, and we can capture that and address them as we're able. So maybe at this time we go ahead and turn it over to you, Nicole, to lead us through a little bit of a collaborative activity.
Sounds good. Thank you, Melanie. So we're now going to transition into an interactive activity where we're going to answer a few questions. We're going to use an online interactive platform called Miro. So I have two questions that I would like for you all to answer, and I'm going to add the Miro link in the chat. Okay, I will give folks a few minutes to click on the link and join, and then I will explain how it works. For those of you who registered leading up to this, I think I have already given you access to it. And if folks are having difficulty joining also, please let me know. So while people are joining, I'm just gonna let you know we have about 20 minutes for this activity. Once time is up, I'm gonna just read out a few of the key comments that were made. If you are unable to participate, you can also comment in the chat, or we have a Google form that we're gonna share with you later on where you can add your thoughts and comments. Okay, so Kessel, if you want to share the Miro activity on the screen. Okay, I'm gonna give folks another minute and then I'm gonna explain what I want everyone to do. Okay, it looks like we have 2 or 3 people that have joined. I can I'll start explaining it now, and then when more people join, I can explain it again. Just want to be conscious of time. So the first question that I would like for you all to answer is, do the priorities that we described match the priorities for you and your community's climate priorities? If not, please list any others that you might have. So that's the first question that I would like for you to answer. Miro is pretty intuitive and pretty easy to use. So what I'd like for you to do is at the bottom of the screen, I put a bunch of sticky notes at the bottom. So what you can do is just click on a sticky note, drag it up. And if you click on it, then you can type in it. So if you wouldn't mind taking a sticky note and putting your thoughts on that, for the first question, that would be great. If you also want to add a sticky note, you can also do that as well on the left-hand side. As you can see, Kessel is adding a sticky note now, so you can do it that way too. Thank you, Kessel. And then I'm gonna just move over to the second question that I want folks to answer and think about. So the second question is, are there any climate related resources or tools you have used that you have found helpful? And doing the same thing with that question, using your sticky notes to provide feedback and comments. So yeah, we have about, like I said, 20 minutes for this activity. Feel free to put your comments on the sticky notes, and if you have any questions or if you're having trouble with this, please let me know and either raise your hand or put your questions in the chat for me.
It looks like Annette's got a couple of questions in the chat for trying to access it.
Oh, hold on.
Same
Oh,
for Lana.
somebody, yes, so some people requested access. I'm going to give them access right now.
Great. So for those of you having trouble,
Yep, give me 1 second. I have to manually add you. Okay, so let's see. Yep, we're going down the list. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, so I think I sent invites. I think everyone should have access.
And if anyone continues to have an issue, now that we'll wait a couple minutes after, it seems like Nicole may have rectified it. If you continue to have an issue, just message us. I could be your stand-in sticky note proxy. I'm happy to, if you want to put things in the chat, and I can put your sticky notes up for you if you would like to do something like that. Don't want the frustration to
Thank you.
override getting your input for the activity.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. And again, we have 2 questions that we want for you to answer. Number 1, do the priorities that we described match the priorities for you and your community's climate priorities? If not, please list any others you might have. And then question number 2, are there any climate related resources or tools you have used that you have found helpful? Oh, Annette and Alice, if you wouldn't mind sending me a direct message and adding your email to the chat, I'll just manually add you again if you can't, if you're having trouble joining. And for anyone else who's having trouble joining, just message me in the chat and I'll just manually add you again.
And I told Ken I'd add his, I saw a message in the chat just for
Oh,
some
okay.
awareness there, so I can add Ken's.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I apologize if this is not as accessible. I saw there was a comment in the chat that Google Form works better for accessibility purposes. I will take that into consideration for next time. I originally wanted to use Jamboard, but Jamboard I think is no longer an option. And I had used Miro a few times, and so, but yeah, thank you for the suggestion for Google Forum. So it looks like we're getting quite a few good comments for the first question. I'm just going to read off a few. So one of the responses says the list of priorities is so large and goes beyond what I thought to be the initial intent of the tool that I believe the project will lose focus and applicability. And then another comment says main priorities for our community are tracking progress and decision making. And if anyone, for those two comments that I just addressed, if anyone has any additional thoughts or wants to add additional details, please feel free to raise your hand or put comments in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that Lindy had replied to Ken's point about the list and potentially the losing focus of the
Gotcha.
tool, and just
Okay.
noted that we appreciated the point and will be considering his
Gotcha.
input as we move forward with the final set of recommendations and the priorities to be included.
Gotcha. Thank you, Melanie. And then for the second question, I see we have a resource link.
Yeah, I believe
I'm just
that
gonna
is
click on it
related
really
to some water
quick.
information that Alice was suggesting that could be helpful for us to take a look at.
Okay, great. So in addition to that, we have not a tool per se, but would like to encourage that the map tool allow for CSV downloads of the different data used and be very clear about what that data period it covers and how often it can be updated. That is a great suggestion. Thank you for that. And then we have another comment that says, yes, ICLEI, ClearPath for GHG emissions in Vermont EAN dashboards, the Public Service Department LEAP data, and also UVM's Transportation Research Center Transportation Sustainability Tracking Tool. So thank you for those additional resources. Great. Matthew, I see you posted in the chat UVM Rural Development Center. So I will add that to our list. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and we do have someone from that center, Matthew, on our data governance team. So we do have a link there, which has been helpful and I think will continue to be helpful moving forward.
Yep. So I'm going to give folks another 4 minutes. Keep on adding to the boards. Like I said, if you want to unmute or add other suggestions to the chat, please feel free to. Okay, so add that one. Okay. Okay, it looks like feedback is winding down. So I'm gonna go to our next activity. But thank you all for indulging me with this Miro activity. We kind of wanted to break up the presentation and do something interactive. So I appreciate all of your feedback and suggestions. So Kessel, if you want to, so before I turn it over to Kessel, I just want, we had one other poll question that we wanted to get your input on. So Kessel, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll question. Okay, so the question is, on a scale from 1 to 5, how likely are you to use the type of information presented in the tool? 1 is extremely likely and 5 is, sorry, 1 is extremely unlikely and 5 is extremely likely. So we'll keep it open for a few minutes and then we'll see what our results are. I think we have everyone answered, or everyone has answered that. So it looked like we have 2 people that said extremely likely, 3 people that said likely, and 2 people were neutral. Thank you for all of that feedback. We really appreciate it. Kat, are you, can you note these results for us? I just want to make
Yep.
sure that we have this information. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I see a comment in the chat. Our town energy committees are going to love the tool. They can be data hungry folks. Awesome. That is great news. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to, I think, Melanie, who is
Yeah.
going to provide us with some next steps and closing.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone,
Yep.
for providing your input. Kessel, if we can go to, there's a slide 32, which is next steps, and it has a little table on it. There we go. Perfect. So in terms of some next steps, I'm going to talk about the questionnaire maybe last, but just in terms of the project timeline, well, we're at the end of January now. So today we have another public meeting, as you may have seen in registering for this one, later today. So if you found it helpful or it spurred some thoughts or conversation and you think other people might want to provide some input or listen in, please feel free to share with them that at 5:30 this evening, we will be having another version of this meeting. So please invite others or tell them about it. We'd love to hear from others and also just share what we're doing to bring people along in the process as we undertake the tool development, because at the end of the day, we do want it to be helpful for people and would love to have everybody providing input so that we can integrate it to our best of our ability moving forward. So other public meeting this evening. And then also from now into February, we'll be continuing engagement with community-based organizations to get their perspectives from them and their constituents about the tool content, about the priorities, what should be measured and reflected in the tool, and things of that nature. As we head into spring, we're going to continue to develop and refine the tool metrics and data, but we're really going to be shifting toward that data piece, which will inform what is possible with current data and will help us identify what data might need to be collected or at least flagged for collection or consideration for collection moving forward. And then in May or early June, we'll be having another public meeting, which please all come to that. We'll be sharing out the tool recommendations and just the results of the work throughout this project. So where did we end up throughout the project of the different priorities, what the tool might be slated to measure, other recommendations about the development of the tool that we've heard from all of you along the way that could be helpful when they move into that next phase of actually developing the tool, considerations that they might want to undertake prior to developing the tool to learn more, what the tool might look like, just different elements of the tool in general. So really closing out this project and the recommendations for consideration moving forward in the tool development. So that's high level, the rest of our contract or project. But then I think something that we'd be really interested in for any of you who either may not have been online or able to participate in the sticky note activity, or just want a chance to actually type some written feedback or provide some more granular information. We've developed a questionnaire that you can take preferably in the next 2 weeks by next Friday, the 7th perhaps. But I'm going to put the link in the chat, and it's really, if it's a Google Forms questionnaire, but please feel free to take that if you would like to provide some additional input, or you can at least open it up and check it out and see if there's anything else that you'd want to provide. We do have an opportunity for, if you're participating as a member of the public or the community, some general questions for you there. And if you're participating or representing an organization or workplace, there are some questions for you based on your organization or workplace as well. So we'd welcome your input. We'll be taking everything we heard and saw in the chat and the sticky notes, everything that we collected from you today during this meeting, and then also anything that we gather from the public meeting this evening and those forum responses, and integrating that as we move forward in refining the tool content and purpose and all of those things. So please feel free to check that out. If for some reason you wanted to provide more information, you have trouble accessing the form, please feel free to, you can reach out to Sophie or myself, and you can provide information that way. I will go ahead and put my email in the chat, just so you have a direct link and you don't have to fish for things quite as much. If you have, oh, thanks, Sophie also entered hers. And I think that's really all that I wanted to say about next steps. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to join today and learn more about what we're doing and providing input that will shape the tool and its content. Anything that you would want to say, ERG team or Sophie, in closing out today?
Just thanks everybody for coming and your interest and for helping this project be better.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate it. And as you probably saw in joining, that the meeting is recorded. So those recordings will be available from this meeting and this afternoon's public meeting as well, if you would like to share it or listen back or reflect on anything. So thank you for your time. I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and hopefully we will see you, if not this evening, then maybe in spring, early summer, as we close out the project and have another public meeting about where we're at with things and recommendations for the tool moving forward. So thank you for your time,
Thank
and
you.
have a good rest of your day.